You know, most people think that rock bottom is a loud place. They think it sounds like a crash, or a scream, or an explosion. But if you asked Victoria Russell, she'd tell you that rock bottom is actually incredibly quiet. It sounds like the hum of fluorescent lights in a parking garage at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. It sounds like the soft, pathetic hiccup of trying to cry without making any noise because you're terrified a security guard is going to kick you out. That's where she was. Level B4 of the Sterling Executive Garage in downtown Chicago. She was pressed up against the cold metal of a silver Bentley, a car that probably cost more than the entire apartment building she lived in, just trying to breathe. She was wearing a black dress she'd bought at a thrift store for $40, money she really should have spent on groceries, and clutching a phone that had just delivered the news that her date, the one she'd pinned all her hopes on, wasn't coming. And to make matters worse, she realized she didn't have the $30 to pay the exit fee for the garage. She was trapped. That's the moment Marcus Whitmore walked into the picture. Now, Marcus wasn't looking for a damsel in distress. He was a guy who ran a multi-billion-dollar empire, a man who spent his days acquiring companies and his nights trying to avoid the blind dates his sister, Caroline, kept setting him up on. He was tired. He was cynical. He was walking to his car, that silver Bentley, dreading the evening ahead, when he heard it. That soft, broken sound of someone trying to hold it all together. He stopped. He saw her there, this figure in black, shaking against his driver's side door. And normally, Marcus would have called security. He would have handled it like a business problem, efficiently and remotely. But something about the way she was crying, something about the sheer desperation of it, made him stop. He cleared his throat and said, "Excuse me, that's my car." When Victoria looked up, Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. It wasn't that she was beautiful, though she was, in a wrecked, raw kind of way. It was her eyes. Hazel, red-rimmed, and filled with a kind of panic he hadn't seen since he was a kid watching his own mother try to figure out which bill to pay. "Oh God," she stammered, jumping back like she'd been burned. "I'm so sorry. I didn't. I just thought this level was empty. I'm leaving." She tried to wipe her face, smearing mascara across her cheek, looking for an exit that didn't exist. Marcus should have let her go. He had a reservation at a French restaurant in 20 minutes with a woman named Jennifer who was supposedly perfect for him. But he couldn't move. "Are you okay?" he asked. It was a stupid question. Obviously she wasn't okay, but it was the only one he had. Victoria let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "I'm great," she said, her voice cracking. "I just got stood up by a guy who couldn't even bother to text me until I'd been waiting for an hour. I spent my last $40 on this dress because my 7-year-old daughter thinks I'm meeting Prince Charming tonight, and I can't afford to get my car out of this garage. So, yeah, I'm doing fantastic." She clapped a hand over her mouth, horrified that she'd just vomited her life story onto a stranger in a $3,000 suit. "Please ignore me," she whispered. "I'm going to go now." But Marcus heard one thing in that spiral of bad news. "Daughter." He heard the way her voice broke when she mentioned her kid. And suddenly, he wasn't the CEO of Whitmore Enterprises. He was just a guy who remembered what it felt like to be helpless. He pulled out his wallet. He didn't say a word. He walked over to the pay station, swiped his black card, and printed a ticket. He walked back and held it out to her. "Here," he said. "And here." He pressed $500 into her hand, cash he kept for emergencies. Victoria stared at the money like it was radioactive. "I can't take this. I'm not begging." "I know you're not," Marcus said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're a mom who had a bad night. Take the money. Pay the babysitter. Buy your daughter a pizza. Go home." She looked at him, tears welling up again, but this time they were different. "Why?" Because Marcus told her about growing up poor in Queens, about building his company from a laptop in a garage. Victoria told him about her nursing classes, about her ex-husband Michael who walked out 3 years ago and never looked back. They laughed. They connected. It felt real. But reality has a way of crashing the party. As Marcus was driving her home, Victoria's phone blew up. It was Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor watching Grace. "Victoria," Mrs. Patterson's voice was shaking. "He's here. Michael is here." Victoria's blood ran cold. "My ex. He's drunk, honey. He's pounding on the door yelling that he wants to see his kid. I threatened to call the cops but he won't leave. I'm coming, Victoria said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and rage. She hung up and looked at Marcus. I have to go. Fast. My ex is at the apartment. Marcus didn't ask questions. He just hit the gas. The playful, charming guy from dinner vanished, replaced by something harder, more protective. When they got to the building, they could hear the shouting from the street. Victoria ran up the stairs, Marcus right on her heels. Michael was there, looking disheveled and mean, kicking at her door. Open the damn door. I have rights. That's my kid in there. You have no rights. Victoria screamed, throwing herself between him and the door. You signed them away 3 years ago. Get out of here. Michael spun around, his eyes glassy. He sneered when he saw her dress. Look at you. All dolled up. Who paid for that, Vic? You turning tricks now. He stepped toward her, raising a hand, and Victoria flinched. But the blow never landed. A hand, strong, firm, and unyielding, caught Michael's wrist in midair. Marcus stepped in front of Victoria. He didn't yell. He didn't look angry. He looked lethal. I think you're done here, Marcus said, his voice low and calm. Michael tried to yank his arm back, but Marcus didn't budge. Who the hell are you? Michael spat. I'm the guy who has the best lawyers in the city on speed dial, Marcus said. And I'm the guy who is currently memorizing your face so I can give it to the police commissioner. You are going to walk down those stairs, you are going to get in your car, and you are never, ever going to come within 500 feet of this woman or her child again. Do you understand? Michael looked at Marcus. He saw the suit. He saw the watch. But mostly, he saw the look in Marcus's eyes that said, I will end you. The bully crumbled. Michael yanked his arm free, muttered something profound like whatever, and stumbled down the stairs. Victoria slumped against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. Marcus turned to her, and the hardness vanished from his face. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping her in his coat, holding her while she sobbed against his chest. He's gone, Marcus whispered into her hair. I've got you. He's not coming back. The door creaked open. Grace peeked out, clutching the book of fairy tales. Is the bad man gone? Marcus let that night changed everything. It wasn't a slow burn anymore. It was a forest fire. Marcus didn't just drop Victoria off and leave. He stayed on her lumpy couch until he was sure Michael wasn't coming back. And then he came back the next day. And the day after that. For the next 2 months, Marcus Whitmore, the guy who was married to his work, became a fixture in apartment 4B. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. He helped Grace with her math homework. He sat on the floor and played Tea Party. He didn't try to buy them things, well, except for groceries, which he insisted on sharing even though he ate maybe one slice of pizza. He just showed up. Victoria fell in love with him. How could she not? He was kind, he was steady, and he looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. But she held back. She kept a wall up. Because she knew how this story went. Eventually, the billionaire wakes up. Eventually, he realizes that a single mom with baggage and debt isn't part of the 5-year plan. And Marcus? Marcus was falling just as hard, but he had his own ghosts. 10 years ago, he'd been engaged. A woman named Amanda. She was perfect on paper. But 2 weeks before the wedding, he found out she'd been funneling inside information about his company to a competitor. She didn't love him, she loved the access. She loved the money. It broke him. It made him suspicious of everyone. He looked at Victoria and he wanted to believe it was real. But a voice in the back of his head kept whispering, is she just another Amanda? Is she just looking for a savior? It all came to a head when Marcus's sister, Caroline, finally intervened. Caroline was protective. She'd seen what Amanda did to her brother. So, she did what any overprotective sister would do. She invited Victoria to lunch. It was an ambush. A polite, high-end ambush with tiny sandwiches. You seem nice, Victoria, Caroline said, stirring her iced tea. Really? But I need to know. What's the endgame here? Endgame? Victoria asked, putting down her fork. My brother is generous, Caroline said. He likes to fix things. He sees you, he sees Grace, and he wants to be the hero. But I know about your debt. I know about the rent. I need to know if you're here for Marcus, or if you're here for the safety net. Victoria felt like she'd been slapped. The shame burned her cheeks. "I love him," she said, her voice shaking. "Do you?" Caroline pressed. "Or do you love that he pays for dinner? Because if you break his heart, if you're just using him to get out of a hole, it will destroy him. He won't survive another Amanda." Victoria left that lunch feeling sick. Was Caroline right? Did she need him too much? Was that fair to him? That night was their 2-month anniversary. Marcus had planned a private dinner on his rooftop terrace. It was breathtaking. Candles, the city skyline glittering below them, soft music playing. But Victoria was quiet. She was distant. Marcus sensed it immediately. He was nervous too. He had a velvet box in his pocket. Not a ring, not yet, but a diamond pendant. A promise. "You're quiet," Marcus said, pouring wine. "Is everything okay?" "I had lunch with Caroline today," Victoria said, staring at her plate. Marcus froze. What did she say? "She told me about Amanda." Victoria looked up, tears in her eyes. "She asked me if I loved you or your money. She thinks I'm using you." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Caroline is protective. I'm sorry. But is she right?" Victoria asked. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me you were afraid I was using you?" "Because I didn't want to believe it," Marcus admitted, his voice quiet. "But it's always there, Victoria. The doubt. I look at my bank account, and then I look at your struggles, and I wonder, if I was a plumber, if I was broke, would you still look at me like that?" It was the wrong thing to say. It was the fear talking, the old trauma surfacing, but it cut Victoria to the bone. She stood up, her chair scraping against the concrete. "I fell in love with you in a parking garage before I knew who you were," she said, her voice rising. "I fell in love with you because you brought my daughter a book, not a diamond. I fell in love with you because you showed up." She reached into her purse and pulled out the emergency cash he'd given her that first night. She'd been saving it to pay him back. She slammed it on the table. "I don't want your money, Marcus. I wanted you. But if you can't see the difference between me and the woman who hurt you, then we have nothing." She turned and ran toward the elevator. "Victoria, wait!" Marcus shouted, standing up. But he hesitated. The old fear paralyzed him for a second. "Let her go," the voice whispered. "It's safer." But then he looked at the empty chair. He thought about Grace laughing at his terrible jokes. He thought about Victoria holding his hand during the scary parts of a movie. He thought about the way his apartment felt cold and dead before they came into it. He realized that being safe was just another word for being alone. He didn't take the elevator. He ran. He took the stairs, sprinting down flight after flight, his heart pounding in his chest, realizing that if he let her walk out that door, he would be the poorest man on earth. He burst out into the lobby just as Victoria was pushing through the revolving doors into the snowy Chicago night. "Victoria!" he screamed, running out onto the sidewalk, ignoring the snow soaking his dress shoes. She stopped. She didn't turn around. Her shoulders were shaking. Marcus slowed down, walking up behind her. "I was wrong," he said, breathless. "I was wrong. I'm an idiot. I'm a scared, damaged idiot who is terrified that the best thing in his life is too good to be true." He reached out, taking her hand, turning her around. Her face was wet with tears. "If you were a plumber," she whispered fiercely, "I'd bring you lunch on the job site. If you were broke, we'd eat ramen on the floor. I don't care, Marcus. I just want the guy who reads dragon stories to my kid." Marcus dropped to his knees right there on the slushy sidewalk. Not to propose, but to beg. "Forgive me," he said, looking up at her. "Teach me how to trust again. Please. I don't want to be safe anymore. I want to be yours." Victoria looked down at him, this billionaire on his knees in the snow, and the anger melted away. She pulled him up and kissed him, a desperate, freezing, perfect kiss that tasted like snowflakes and second chances. "You're going to get cold," she laughed through her tears. "I don't care," he smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I'm warm right here." 6 months later, the wedding wasn't in a grand ballroom. It was in a garden, small and intimate. Caroline was there, looking apologetic and happy, crying into a handkerchief. Marcus stood at the altar, watching Victoria walk down the aisle in a simple white dress, and he knew in his bones, that this was the best deal he had ever made. But the moment everyone remembers isn't the vows. It was when the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" And a little voice rang out, clear as a bell. "I do." Grace stepped forward, wearing a flower crown, holding Marcus's hand. She looked at the crowd, then up at Marcus with a grin that was missing a front tooth. "I give her to him," she announced to the guests, "because he's my dad now. And dads stay." There wasn't a dry eye in the place. Marcus picked Grace up, tears streaming down his face, and held her while he kissed his bride. They didn't just live happily ever after. That's for books. They lived real. They fought, they made up, they dealt with homework and business trips and flu seasons. But they did it together. And every year, on the anniversary of that night in the parking garage, Marcus takes Victoria back to spot B4 in the Sterling Tower. They play a song on the car stereo, and they dance under the flickering fluorescent lights, just to remind themselves that the best things in life aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones you find when you're busy crying over something else. So, if you're feeling like you've been stood up by life, like you're trapped in a parking garage waiting for a break, just hold on. You never know who might be walking to their car, ready to change your whole world. Because sometimes, a cancelled date isn't a dead end. It's just the universe clearing the schedule for the main event. I'm curious, have you ever had a moment where everything went wrong, only for it to lead you exactly where you needed to be? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you believe in second chances, hit that like button. Until next time, keep your heart open. You never know who's about to walk in.